In the movie, one of the things that they do in Back to the Future 2, they go to the year 2015. Now, that was about 10 years ago, but they had these ideas about what 2015 would look like, what the future would look like. And you can see the first one up there was that they had in the movie that people had wearable technology, okay? I don't remember exactly what Marty's glasses were, but, the idea and the concept was there. And if you think about it, we have those things today. I've got a watch that, I could check on my phone. I can see how much I slept or didn't sleep last night. I can see how many steps I did yesterday. I can see how much calories I burned. I can, if I would enter my food, I can see how much food I would eat. It tells me all those things. It tells me how much stress I'm undergoing at certain times. And every once in a while, it'll flash to me and say, you need to take a break. Here's a breathing exercise because you're stressed too much and stuff like that. We wear wearable technology. So movie kind of, had wearable technology, kind of interesting. Then another thing the movie did was there was video communications, okay? Yeah, we got it. Zoom, meetings, group meetings, all those type of things, line meetings, everything else. We got it, video communication. Kind of got the idea correctly. Then there was biometric identification, and this is a scene where he's getting into a taxi, and in order to get in to pay for the taxi, he's got to give his thumbprint. Well, how many of you open your phones with your thumbprint, okay? Or your face recognition, something like that. It's something that's happening today. Then there was drone technology, and you can't see this very well, but where that arrow is pointing, there's a drone that's actually walking a dog. Now, I haven't seen that, but we've seen everything else, a lot of other things with drones right now. And so that technology is there. And so it's kind of interesting that this movie in itself, a movie, predicts the future, and we can see those things happening. But we really don't know what the future is going to hold. I read a lot of things about predictions this week. Well, not a lot of things, but I spent an hour or two reading about predictions and different thoughts and different ideas. And I read about how that, there's certain groups of people that think that they can predict the future, okay? And one group is there was a guy that was really famous in the last Soccer World Cup because he predicted actually most of the outcomes of most of the soccer events. And people got all excited, and they wanted to get behind how he did it, and he used technology to help him and everything else, and they started applying that to other things, and guess what? It didn't work so well. He just got lucky that time, okay? Now, it works a little bit. There's a group at some of the major universities and major research universities that are looking about how they can take trends from the past, and they can apply conditions right now, and they can maybe predict the future. They can maybe predict what will happen 6 months from now or a year from now, and sometimes even up to 10 years from now. But still, it's not very accurate. And all through history, even our own Bible, we call them prophecies, but they are predictions. Now, we call them prophecies because we know they're going to come true because all the other prophecies in the Bible have come true so far. Okay? So we don't doubt it. But people have turned. You watch old movies, old TV shows, or read old books, and especially about some cultures, that maybe they take an animal and they split open the animal and let the guts fall on the ground, and that will tell them whether or not they're going to win the battle or not. They're looking for ways to predict the future. Okay? Other people go to psychics, things like that, and say, hey, tell me what my future is going to be. What's it going to look like? We search for the future. I think it's kind of funny when we talk about psychics because every once in a while, well, not every once in a while, it seems like 2 or 3 times a week, I get an email, get your psychic reading, from this person. I'm like, if they're psychic, they should know I wouldn't respond to that email, so why did they send it to me in the first place? But never mind. Okay, that's just my own rant, okay? When I was a kid, we get a newspaper. Do you guys remember newspapers? Those big paper things that you would fold open things. You get a paper, and the paper came in the morning when I was in high school. So you get the paper, and first thing you do is had to wait for Dad to read the paper. And when he was done with a section, then you could have a section. And so you would get. There was 2 different sections I was always interested in. I was always interested in the sports section because we didn't have internet or anything, and so you would find out the scores from the games the day before by reading the sports section. And then there was the other section that was the comics, and then they always had like a crossword puzzle. There was a couple other little, one of those comparison puzzles. You know what I'm talking about, where they have two pictures and you have to pick out what's wrong between the pictures. And then there in that also was what was called the daily horoscope. And I know people that would look at those things and their day would go according to how that horoscope was, because they thought it should, so it would just go that way. And people are interested in that type of thing because we are interested in the future. One of the things, as I said, as I read this week, was what I picked up was, and it was in one scientist, his blog, and he was talking about some of these things. He said, the only thing about the future we really have figured out is that the future is actually very hard to predict. But we all want to know the future because we want to make plans for the future, okay? Nancy asked me this week and last week too, but she was like, why didn't we buy a house, like when we got married? I said, it was a good question. I said, it's also a good question, why I didn't buy Facebook stock back in 2004. Didn't know what was going on, okay? If we could predict the future, then, there's different things happen. One of the things in these movies, one of the reasons he had to go back and forth in time was because another guy stole the time machine and went forward in time and got an almanac recording all the major events in the world, especially a sports almanac about who won every game. Then he went back to the past and gave it to his young self in the past, so his young self could bet on all those games and win all this money. Okay, we wish it was like that sometimes, don't we? We wish sometimes we could go back and go now. Always have that discussion with people. Well, why didn't we do this? Why do we? Because we just didn't know what the future was going to hold. And sometimes we make decisions and we make plans and we have ideas because we think what the future is going to do, and then the future doesn't do that. And our plans fail and our plans succeed. So as we look at Proverbs for help for daily life today, we're going to look at the future and plans and what Proverbs has to say about those things. Okay? And we're going to go through a lot of different verses and just pop through the verses. I've done something new. I haven't done this in a long time, but if you scan the QR code, or if you have the YouVersion Bible app and you look under events and go to events, you should see the sermon notes there. Or like I said, you can scan this QR code and it'll be on every slide. So if you don't get it right now, it's okay. You can get it later. Some of you like that type of thing, and I always like that type of thing. You can have your notes right there. And you can also change the Bible so that you can read it in your own language and things like that too if you want to as well, okay? All right, let's pray and then before we move on. Father, I thank you for the opportunity to share your word. And Father, as we look into Proverbs and we look at these things that Solomon said and collected so many years ago, we find that they apply to our life right now. So as we talk about future and plans, help us to understand so that we can be better at our planning. We can be more diligent about following your will for our lives. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. Here are some things about our plans. First of all, Proverbs talks about the uncertainty of our plans for the future. And it begins with, our plans are not fail-safe. Okay? Don't think I need to explain that any. I think everyone understands that. Our plans can work, but they cannot work, and we just don't know until we put them in place and see what happens. Proverbs 16:25 says this, there's a path before each person that seems right. Those are our plans. Those are our ideas. But it ends in death. And what he's basically saying is, hey, you need to be careful because there's so much uncertainty. And if we take the wrong path, if we take the wrong road, it's going to end in death. And what's this death talking about? It can be a physical death. But it's also talking about a death and being separated from God. And separated from his goodness, separated from his love, his forgiveness, and everything he is. And so he says, hey, consider your pathway. Consider what you consider to be the future. Father, I want to have a good life. Okay? Maybe you don't even say, God, I want to have a good life. Maybe you just think, I want to have a good life. And you think, oh, if I only do this, my life will be good. And God says, time out. It may be, but it may not be. You need to really carefully consider it. Okay, so our plans are not fail-safe. Second thing is we cannot predict the future. Look at the, well, actually, before I go there, let me think about a couple of things. And as I shared with you about the future and how it's hard it is to predict the future, I had a story, and where's my story? I didn't put the story in my notes. All right, well, let's forget about the story. But the story, it was just another one of those stories about predicting the future and how things didn't work and did work, okay? All right, so look at this verse. Proverbs 27:1 says, don't brag about tomorrow, since tomorrow you don't know what the day will bring. Solomon says it's very clear. Remember, Solomon was considered one of the wisest men ever to live. He says, hey, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Okay, a week and a half ago, Wednesday morning, driving the boys to school, dropping them off at school, did I know what was going to happen 2 minutes later? No. Okay, now some of you are like, I knew what was going to happen the rest of the day. Yeah, we were going to have aftershocks, but we didn't know about that big earthquake that was going to happen. I've had this discussion with people in the past. Do you want to live in a place where, like in the middle of the U.S., where there's lots of tornadoes? Do you want to live where there's hurricanes? Do you want to live where there's earthquakes? Do you want to live where there's lots of disease? Where is it you want to live? And most people say that they like typhoons, hurricanes, because they can see them coming. Because we don't like things that are unpredictable. We don't like things to happen that just surprises us. But if we brag about tomorrow, if we think we know what's going to happen tomorrow, we need to be careful because we may be surprised. So, two things about the future. It's uncertain, and we just don't know what's going to happen, okay? Our plans, therefore, cannot be secure. They may be good plans, and they may be plans that work out. But they're not the best plans for your life. God has the best plans for your life, and we're going to see that as we go further in this. Proverbs does encourage us to make plans. Look at this verse. Good planning. So if you look at good planning, the other English translation says plans of the diligent. And I like that word. That just feels good, diligent. Those who are diligent. So good planning. So Proverbs doesn't say don't plan, but it says had good planning. But it adds something else to it, and hard work. That's what we're going to talk about next week, okay? Lead to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts lead to poverty. So Proverbs includes us to have good planning. So my question is, what constitutes good planning? Well, it gives us some ideas, some things. Diligent planning factors. The first thing is we need to gather information. Have you ever met somebody that you ask them, what are you going to do tomorrow? And they're saying, we're going to go spend the day at the beach tomorrow. And then you look at the weather and you're like, it's 99% chance of rain tomorrow. And it's only supposed to be 17 degrees. Are you sure you want to go to the beach? And they're like, oh, yeah. Okay. Now that's a silly information, or silly example. But you need, some people aren't laughing, but you need to think about your plans, okay? I plan to one day have a Maserati car. Well, that's a plan, but what's some information I need to gather? Well, first of all, I'll probably need to consider how much it costs, right? How am I going to get there? Is it really that important and everything else, okay? My plan right now is my boys become rich and they buy me one. So I got a good plan, all right? So, we can have different ideas, but we gather information, okay? We gather thoughts. We gather ideas. When I first came here, there was a whole nother church involved in a church plant that was an independent church plant, and I gathered information. I knew a little bit already, but I sat and talked with several people that were part of that church and what was going on, what was happening, and why did they want me to come, and what could I do for them, how could I help them. That was gathering information. Then we made a plan from there. Okay, so you need to gather information. Proverbs 15:22 says, plans go wrong for the lack of advice, but many advisors bring success. Okay, many advisors bring success. There are a couple of things I like in different scriptures. Look at this in 1 Corinthians 15:13. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. So when we go back to this verse, many advisors bring success. I want to add to that, consider your advisors. Okay? Who are your advisors? What's their reputation? What's their experience? And what's their, record in the past? Okay? Have they been good advisors or bad advisors? And I've shared this with you before that I've got just a little bit of investments here and there. And some of the investment people I have some investments with, I would recommend them to other people. But one, I would not recommend them to anyone, because what happened with my investment and what happened with others' investments that I know of. And so you consider those things, and you consider the character of the person you're seeking advice from. Seek out those who can give you good advice. Okay? Somebody that you know maybe a little bit, someone that you trust, hopefully someone that's following God. Those are the best people to seek advice from. Then we get to Esther, and one of my favorite parts of Esther's story is this part right here. Okay? If you remember the story of Esther, the King Xerxes had thrown a banquet. His wife had thrown a banquet. He had requested his wife to come to his banquet. She refused him. The queen said, no, I don't want to. I'm too busy with doing all this. And the king was very upset about it. And the king's advisor says, you can't let this happen. You're the king. Your wife needs to obey you. You need to set example. So he set an example. He got rid of her. Okay? And he got rid of her, and then his advisors came back, and they told him, you need to find a new queen. And that's when they found Esther. But when that all happened, before they advised him, here's what happened. The king had this problem. And look what it says. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice. In other words, he consulted his experts in the law of the land. They knew the law of the land. They understood the times. They understood everything that was going on. They were experts. He spoke with wise men who understood the times. He sought advice. He was king. He could decide anything he wanted to. But he thought, if I'm going to have a plan, I need to get good advice. So he sought those around him who he thought would give good advice. So we seek out good advice. We gather information, find out as much as we can about it. Okay? Second thing is, seek out God's plan. Proverbs 16:9 says, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. The Lord determines steps. In other words, God has a plan for your life, and if you're following God, he's going to determine that plan happens. So when we make our plans, we think about, what does God want for my life? And again, I've shared with you in my life that, when I was 17 years old, I said, okay, God, I'm going to serve you in ministry, but I'm going to do it my way. And I fought for years because God said, nope, you're not going to do it your way. You're going to do it my way. And his way brought me all the way to here. And I'm thankful for that. But I literally fought against God at times. And God says, you have your plans. You've committed yourself to serve me in ministry. That's what I want. But I need all of you, not just part of you. You need to give me your plans as well. Okay? So the Lord determines his steps. Look at James says this. James says, look here, who say, today or tomorrow we're going to a certain town and we're going to stay there a year. We'll do business there and make a profit. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Again, future's uncertain, right? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, then it's gone. What you ought to say is, if the Lord wants us to, we will live and do this or do that. Otherwise, you're boasting about your own pretentious plans, and all such boasting is evil. Go back to look. You ought to say, if the Lord wants us to, we will live and do this or do that. God is not saying don't plan. God is not saying don't think, okay, I'm going to do this in the future. But what he's saying is, you seek me out. If it's what the Lord wants us to do. What does God want you to do? That's one of the biggest questions that's always asked in church. What is God's will? You seek out God's plan. Then look at this. Naturally, the next question is, how do I know what God's plan in my life is? And I'm going to go to verses in Romans, and Romans have these verses, and some of you are very familiar with their verses. It says, so dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because all he has done for you. Your bodies, your plans, everything to God because of what he's done. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice that he will find acceptable. This is truly your way to worship him. Okay? Back of our worship team t-shirts, you say, we worship in truth and spirit. So it's truly the way to worship him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. Let God transform you in a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will know God's will for you. In other words, you will know God's plan for you, which is as good and pleasing and perfect. Okay? So, the key to understanding God's plan, the key to understanding the future, and we're going to talk about this at the end again, is what? Is your relationship with God. Okay? Here are some things. These next 4 things I give you, these are more related to this verse about how God can transform you and how that transformation inside of you can lead to good plans. So the first thing is Proverbs 11:2. The next one's going to be in Proverbs 11:3. Humility. When pride comes, then comes disgrace. With humility comes wisdom. When you are humble, you're willing to seek the advice of others. When you are humble, you're willing to admit, I don't know what the future is. When you're humble, you're willing to admit, I need help, and you're willing to go before God and God say, help me. God, help me figure this out. Help me figure out what you want me to do. Help me figure out whether I should do this or not. Help me figure out what the future is going to be and what it's going to look like. That's what humility does for us. It's essential when we come into making diligent plans. Because if we're not humble, then our plans are more likely going to crumble at some point. And I didn't mean for that to rhyme, even though it did, okay? Second thing, integrity. Proverbs 11:3 says this, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. The integrity of the upright. So doing what is honest, doing what is right, doing what is true, what is noble, what is admirable. Those are the things we need to do. It will guide you to good steps and good plans in your life. Then the next thing, personal responsibility. Okay? Remember the verse back in James we read? Then you should go do it and say, if it's by God's will, then live your life and go do it. Well, there's a personal responsibility involved. And sometimes we don't take that responsibility. Look at Proverbs 21:31. The horse is prepared for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to God. It's God's plan. It's God's work. It's everything God's want. But God says what? Be prepared. Okay? You read through the Old Testament, and many times God won the battles for the Israelites. But the Israelites had to be prepared. They had to go out. Whether it was Jehoshaphat, sending the choir out in front of the army, whether it was Joshua leading the people and setting ambushes and everything else, they had to go about the work. But it was always in God's hands. And so we go about our planning, we go about our thoughts, we go about our ideas, we go and do them, but we always keep in mind it's God who determines what will happen. If the plans are successful or not are up to God. And we seek God out in all of that. And then the last thing, Again, a set of verses very familiar to some of us. Trust God, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Okay, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not depend on your own understanding. Another English translation says, do not lean on your own understanding. And I kind of like that, a little bit better. We don't rely on our own understanding. We rely on God and his understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. You seek out God, God will show you the right plan for your life. Either a short-term plan or a long-term plan. It will all be there. Look at Psalms chapter 20, verse 7, okay? Some trust in chariots and some in horses. And I bring this in because sometimes we go about trying to do God's plan, but then we get so prepared, we start relying on our preparation, but not on God. Does that make sense? Sometimes when I'm preparing sermons, I have a sermon and I think, man, I'm gonna hit a home run with this one. This was gonna be the best sermon I ever preached. And I get so confident. I trust in horses. I trust in chariots. I deliver that sermon, and I can tell by the looks on everybody's faces that was one of the worst sermons I've ever given. But then there's other times where I'm prepared, but I'm just like, God, I'm not. I think this is what you want me to say. I think this is where you want me to go. I think this is how you want it to happen. And as I preach that sermon, and I'm, as I'm talking to people, in the back of my head, I'm praying, oh God, oh God, oh God, help me. Then afterwards, I'll have somebody say, Pastor, that was one of the best sermons you've preached, because this is what God did in my life with it. You see, we need to be prepared. But we should not trust in our preparation. Our trust should always remain in the Lord. Pastor Billy and Lex, they need to be prepared in their leading of Awana clubs and helping people set up clubs. But it all comes back to who's at work. God is at work, not anybody else. Now, shift gears a little bit here. Proverbs also gives us some things that are hindrances to successful plans. We're not going to read these verses because we've read them already. But look at it. If you look at Proverbs 11:3, and we talked about that word duplicity, he said, you can't be duplicit. Well, dishonesty, crookedness are also used in that sense. And if you're that type of person, your plans aren't reliable, your plans aren't good, and your plans won't probably be successful in the long term. May have short-term success, but not long-term success. Hastiness, Proverbs 21, okay? I've got a friend that's in ministry, and it seems like every year in his church this is the program that's going to make the difference. Next year, well, we were wrong about that program. This is the program that's going to make the difference. Next year, this is the program. And he doesn't think about it. It's just like, he kind of reads something and reads that, oh, this is kind of the latest fad here, but let's just do this. And he doesn't make good plans. He doesn't seek the advice of others. He doesn't consider the situation he's in, the place he's in. And so sometimes he just works too hastily. Now, there are some of us, and I'm one of those included, that may be a little bit too slow on things. So we have to find that balance. But if you have an idea and say, this is what I need to do, and you just want to jump in and do it, then give yourself a timeout, okay? I've read a lot of, especially dealing with social media and dealing with athletes and stars and things like that in the past few years. And one of the things that is constantly coming out is they're saying, think before you hit send. In other words, you read something, you respond to it, you hit send, and then, 10 minutes later you realize you shouldn't have sent that out. And they said, think before you send. And that's what hastiness doesn't let us do. It doesn't let us consider it. And pretty much everything in life, if you have a plan, you have an idea, and you think this is a good idea, you can at least sleep on it overnight and get up the next day and look at it again and think about if it's a good plan. Some things are quicker than others, but you don't need to be hasty. Proverbs 27:1, again, I mentioned this when we talked about arrogance. If you're arrogant, You don't do all these other things, and so it can lead to hindrances in your plans, keeping your plans from being successful. So we have our 6 things about planning factors, diligent planning factors. You gather information, seek out God's plan, be humble, have integrity, have personal responsibility, and trust God in all we do. But that's not it. The key, okay, I'll go back. Some of you are starting to raise your phones. Here you go. Okay, I'll go back. The key to successful planning is more than that. The key to successful execution of a plan is committing that plan to God. Why is that so important? Because when you commit a plan to God, what are you doing? You're seeking God's approval for it. So in other words, you're asking God, is this a good plan for my life? When you're seeking your approval, and you're seeking out God and committing the plan to God, one of the other things is you're considering the will of God in it. And then you're trusting God in it as well. Look at Proverbs 16. Proverbs 16 says this, to a man belongs the plans of the heart. We read that already, okay? But from the Lord comes the reply of the tongue. A man's way seems innocent to him, but his motives are weighed by the Lord. And basically, what this first part is saying is we have plans. Often our plans come out of our heart. What is it we like to do? What are our instincts to do? Which is okay. Okay? But it says that from the Lord becomes reply to tongue. In other words, I have a plan. Tomorrow, I think here's what I'm going to do. And that comes out of my heart, and I start sharing it with my people that are advising around me, and all those people say, I just don't think that's what the Lord wants you to do. It's a reply of the tongue. Is seeking those advisors out. When I go to God in prayer and talk to God about it, and I get a sense from God doesn't want me to do, that's his reply. And so we're checking our plans against what God wants, and so that plan may be good or may not be good, and so we're checking all those things. A man's way seems innocent to him. It may seem good, like a good plan to me. Okay, God, though, kind of looks into the motives of my heart. Why is it I want that plan? Why is it I want that thing? Okay. Why is it that I desire this? Why is it I think this is a good plan? And he helps me to check against that, because sometimes I make plans and I realize that my plan was just my own self-interest. It didn't think about Nancy. It didn't think about my boys. It didn't think about my family. It was just to serve me. So as I start committing my plans to God, these things start coming out. Then that verse 3, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. Now, this is just more than going in a prayer and saying, God, here's my plan. I commit it to you. Whew, all right, it's going to succeed. Because it goes back to all those other things. When you're committing, you're seeking God out. You're committing the plan to God and saying, God, show me if this is a good plan or not. God, help me with the resources I need for this plan. God, lead me through this plan. God, show me this plan. When we commit our ways and our work to the Lord, he will bless our efforts according to his perfect will. See? Is it God's plan? That's the question. And if it's God's plan, then go for it. Because God will be there with you. Don't forget to trust in God. Don't forget to rely on him. Don't forget to check on him as that plan is working out. But seek God out in it at all times. Let's go to God in prayer.